Ryan Reynolds here from Mint Mobile with a message for everyone paying big wireless way too much. Please, for the love of everything good in this world, stop. With Mint, you can get premium wireless for just $15 a month. Of course, if you enjoy overpaying, no judgments, but that's weird. Okay, one judgment. Anyway, give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
Upfront payment of $45 for 3-month plan, equivalent to $15 per month required. Intro rate first 3 months only, then full price plan options available. Taxes and fees extra. See full terms at mintmobile.com.
I'm as mad as hell, and I'm not gonna take this anymore!
Howdy, friends. Welcome back to the show. My guest today is Helene M. Epstein. Yes, the M is important according to her. She is just a badass patient safety advocate. And my God, she drops the bomb on so many terrible data points about how many people are harmed every year from hospital errors. And I wouldn't say it's intentional malfeasance, but human error only plays a small part of the issue. She herself was misdiagnosed with breast cancer and had unnecessary surgery, and her son was misdiagnosed for almost 15 years. What a hell of a story, and what a platform she's built for herself. We've been circling each other for a very long time, and she came to the studio. We met in person for the first time, a big hug, had a great conversation, and you were going to walk away from the show pissed, but thrilled that someone like her has got our back and is working on our behalf. So without further ado, Helene M. Epstein. Hello, Helene.
Hello, how are you?
Anyone ever call you Helene?
No, they've had other names for me, though.
Okay. All right. Reserve for a future podcast.
Okay.
Normally, when I do research on guests who have not been on the show yet, I can dig up maybe a page or two of things to talk about. I had 7 pages for you, so God help us if I can even cull out 1% of all the things I'd love to talk to you about in our limited time here in 30 or 40 minutes. But I love that you are an agency girl. It's such a niche little club to be a part of when you bond with people who know what that universe is like. And I just, it's like going to Jew camp. Like you're just a little tribe, you know, the people, right? So how did you get started in the agency world? And like, where were what was the Kindle that turned you into this back in the 80s?
Well, I came from a family of doctors, so I was the oddball who went into business.
Okay.
And in my freshman year of college, I took an advertising copywriting class, and I had a blast doing it. And I decided that's what I wanted to do. And then I transferred to NYU and I studied marketing there and got a job. I actually got pegged by Gray Advertising's founder, the Fatt family, F-A-T-T. They came and I got an award and they offered me a mentorship and an internship, and I ended up not taking it. I ended up taking a full-time job.
Okay.
And from there I went
ballsy,
to...
good.
Yeah. Why not? I wanted the money. From there I went to Marstella, and from Marstella I went to Saatchi, and from there I went to my own consultancy.
All right. Loaded question. You missed marketing in the 80s and 90s when it was like no internet. It was so different back then. It
was so different back then. But it was also, there was nothing digital. I remember every ad, every newspaper ad, magazine ad had to be done. They had to print the type and lay the type down. And they had to, there were guys who, like, you could not give them work after lunch.
Right.
Because they drank their lunch. And so if you didn't get them to do the work in the morning, you had to sneak into their office and pull it from them at lunchtime and try to give it back to them next thing in the morning. So
my favorite agency story is that BBDO had a speakeasy. You know the story?
No, tell me.
It was like, I would imagine it's a remnant from the Don Draper days, but when you didn't need speakeasy, you just drank openly.
We all drank openly, yes.
BBDO had a speakeasy, I think, on the 7th or 8th floor. And the name of the speakeasy was called Central Filing.
Perfect.
So Yeah, true story, kids. Look it up. Real story. You'll never find it on the internet, I guarantee you. Yeah. Where, we're going to have a meeting later. Where? Let's meet at Central Filing. Sure, okay. And
Sounds
no one knew what
perfect.
the hell you were talking about. And sure enough, what a great place to be.
You know, we had the bar was across the street where we would all meet. But when you talk about the Don Draper days, I really lived those Don Draper days. I lived when the secretary of one of the, I guess it was the president of the agency at the time, she came in with a new fur coat after having gone with him on a business trip. I mean, it was definitely those days. And there were presumptions. If you were a woman in power, there were presumptions that you only got into power by sleeping your way up.
Working girl.
Working girl. Yeah, absolutely.
So you were the anti-Sigourney Weaver of your time.
No, I was accused of that because I did very, very well and I moved my way up, but I didn't have to. I think what gave me an in was that when they tried to shock me, you know, by telling me a dirty joke or by telling me a story that was
Something
perhaps
inappropriate by today's standards.
Very inappropriate by today's standards. Rather than being shocked, I would laugh heartily and then I would tell them a dirtier joke. And then they stopped trying to shock me and we just got to work. I was also pretty darn smart. So when people tried to get me in the corner, I was able to get out. I mean, I had lots of attempts. It was bad.
So I noticed something about you in your profile in my spelunking of your fabulousness. You were the artistic director of a classical troupe.
Yes.
Tell me about that.
Yeah, that was great. I left advertising. Well, actually, when I was still at Marsteller and we were given the opportunity to take classes that would help us with our career. And one of the classes I took was film class at NYU. And I realized I liked being in front of the camera more than I liked being behind it. Now, that changed after a while, but initially that's what I did. So I started taking acting classes, and my theory was I'm paying for them myself. They were better than therapy because you got to yell and scream and be a sled shushing down the mountain.
Yep.
And when I started my consultancy, I initially had more free time, so I started taking acting classes, and I met these incredible people I'm still very close with today. And we decided, let's do it for ourselves because we were tired of spending our time trying out what is there in New York? Commercials and soap operas and background actors in movies.
Voiceover too, radio.
Yes, there was a lot of that, but I didn't have the voice for radio. I had the
What are you
face.
talking about?
I had the face for radio, not the voice for radio. So we decided to do it ourselves, and there was a group of 4 of us who were willing to do the hard work. And I, raised my hand when they needed an artistic director. That was me, and we had a blast doing it.
So was it stage?
All stage.
Musical?
Yes. All stage. No,
Okay.
it was Shakespeare, Moliere, and that whole genre. We did that not because we were so highfalutin. We did that simply because you didn't have to pay royalties.
Yes.
It was cheap, and cheap was good when you were... Look, we ended up in the black at the end of every season, unlike most theater companies. Maybe $10, enough to buy a pizza.
Right.
But we always ended up in the black because we didn't pay anybody. Everybody did it for free. And we gave a lot of tickets away. And we were up by the mayor's house.
Gracie Mansion?
Yeah, there's a YMCA, I guess, that's there, about a block or so away. And they had a beautiful theater that held 500 people and a good soundboard and a good lighting board, and they gave it to us for free.
That's awesome. There's such a corollary between theater and acting and marketing because all the world really is a stage.
Yes.
You're just
exactly.
manipulating people to, what do they say in Fight Club, to buy shit they don't need with money they don't have.
Well, I tried not to do that. I mean, I was the business development girl rather than...
Wait, who are your clients?
Well, initially it was Dan and Yogurt.
Okay.
That was one of my big,
That is
big
shit we
clients.
need.
That is stuff we need.
Yeah.
And I was working with the guy who invented it. I mean, the guy
Mr.
who...
Dannon?
The guy who put the fruit at the bottom of yogurt. That
Okay.
was his big claim.
Wow.
Juan Metzger. I just remembered his name. And he was wonderful. But I also worked with children's fashions, and I worked with other packaged goods products, and I worked with industrial clients, the guys who make the tractors, because that's
Wow.
what Marsteller dealt with. They dealt with both industrial and packaged goods. But I quickly got involved in business development, so I was teaching advertising agencies how to do for themselves what they did for their clients.
So flipping the script here, we are talking about consumer packaged goods, which is a demand market.
Yes.
Where people are hoping to find things they would love to enjoy and spend their money on, versus healthcare, which is a supply market that no one wants to be walking around in.
Yeah, exactly. It's a club you don't want to be a member of.
It really isn't. It really isn't. So there's so many places we could start here, but I think the cancer misdiagnosis story is pretty epic. Let's talk about that.
Okay, so it's one. I actually gave a talk to a group of radiologists, and boy, did they have questions about this. So it was 2006, and I just went for my very first digital mammogram. And thank God for the invention of digital mammograms, because they can see things, they can zoom in on things. And I knew I was in trouble when they asked me to wait in the waiting room. They came back and they said, we need to take one more image just of your right breast. Just of your left breast, and we need to get a lot closer. And they had the doctor bring me back immediately. I ended up being there for 3.5 hours, and they had the doctor bring me back immediately. And she was able to, instead of showing me a gray, cloudy X-ray, she was able to put the digital thing up on the screen, zoom in and say, we saw this. We didn't like seeing this, so we took another film closer. And then she was able to bring it up and really zoom in. And she said, this is a cluster of cancer cells. She said, do you have any of your old films? And I said, they're not digital, they're film films. And she said, it is 4:40 p.m. Can you go and get them? So I called up the place and I told them what was happening. And I said, I need them now. Ran over, picked them up, pouring rain, by the way. And I ended up having, the biopsy. And the biopsy showed that there was some cancer in the biopsy. And then I did the tour of surgeons. And that was where
Just like Prairie Home Companion.
Oh my goodness.
But a little different.
A lot different. And the first 2 surgeons I saw were female surgeons. And I'm always female-centric. In fact, my son once asked me, I brought him to a doctor who was the first male doctor he ever had. And he came home and he was like, Mom, men can be doctors too.
Right. Yes.
He had never seen a male doctor. So I had 2 female surgeons, and they were, for lack of a better word, they were hysterical. I had like a little cluster, what basically they presumed was a DCIS. After the biopsy, they found it was a DCIS. And they were saying, oh, well, we're going to have to remove your left breast and we're going to do a lumpectomy on your right breast. And I said, why? They didn't find anything in my right breast. They wanted to do this massive surgery. So I took myself, at the time I was living in Westchester, so I took myself into the city and I went to 2 top surgeons at 2 different hospitals. And they were far more relaxed. And they were like, listen, we do hundreds of these a day. Don't worry about it. We got you. I eventually went with Memorial Sloan Kettering with a fantastic surgeon. I don't know if I'm allowed to say his name on the air. So,
is he in jail?
No,
okay.
no. No, I don't know if he's still working, but he did. I went through all the wire. That was a funny story because I'm riding the elevator with the wire, and I actually chose Memorial Sloan Kettering because I could do the guided wire.
Wow. Okay.
In the hospital, whereas the other hospital needed me to go to a place across town, and then with a robe on and a wire sticking out of my breast, drive across
how convenient
Manhattan to go and have the surgery. And I was like, no, I'm not. I'm sorry, I'm not doing that. I've been in many accidents in Manhattan. I don't want to do that. And they did this. They took a very large amount of tissue in a lumpectomy.
Did you have bilateral?
No.
Okay.
It was just DCIS left breast.
Okay, so
and they found nothing. They found absolutely nothing.
Despite 9,000 mammograms.
They went and ultrasounds and you name it, and they kept going back in and taking more tissue because they thought surely there must be some cancer there.
And don't call me Shirley.
And there was nothing. Basically the surgeon said to me afterwards, he said, you never had cancer. This was all a complete mistake from beginning to end. You had 1 cell of cancer in your biopsy.
Wait, so what the hell were they looking for on the digital mammograms?
The digital mammogram was this little cluster of cells, and when they biopsied it, it turned out there was one pre-cancer 00 cell. It doesn't matter, though, if you have cancer or you don't have cancer, because there was one cell, and there were a lot of hysterics. But they basically said, you've got nothing. You never had anything. We probably could have just watched it.
And then the lawsuits came?
No.
Okay.
No. I was happy for good news. I mean, there's a lot of people who've been through chemotherapy and radiation therapy and a lot more, and turned out they didn't have cancer. I mean, there's always those surgeons that people point fingers at.
So you weren't angry?
I was upset at the unnecessary scare. I was grateful that I was told I never had to put cancer on a form.
Well, clearly a better problem to have is to not have it in the first place, but still,
right,
to put you through all of that mental shenanigan crap because someone read a scan wrong or because one cell meant you're dying. Right.
It was really truly the hysteria that made me angriest, and not the attitude of the doctors. And by the way, when I was done with that mammogram, and I was nervous, but I just, in my gut, I knew I was fine and I was going to be fine. There was something in me that just said, this is not going to be the end of you. I just had that feeling and I stuck to it. And I think because I had that feeling, I was less angry afterwards. My husband was a lot angrier than I was because he went through all the fear and absolutely no control, no decision making. I did all the decisions for myself. And he was fantastic. He was completely supportive.
People have asked me, how am I still alive today?
Right.
And there's no answer to that. But I do remember very concretely never believing I was going to die. It never occurred to me that I could possibly die from having brain cancer. One, it was so inane and surreal. Two, I was 21 and invincible. Right. And three, I guess I just got lucky.
Yeah. If only that was a cure for cancer. A great attitude.
Yeah, attitude is everything, and the chemo helps.
Yeah. But I do think that one of the reasons I wasn't angry was that was in the middle of my son's diagnostic odyssey. Mm-hmm. And I was so hyper-focused on what he needed. I will tell you one very funny story, though, because I came home once I decided I was going to have the surgery, and I sat down with my son, and I had all this data of how do you talk to your child about breast cancer. And I had this whole conversation with him, and I explained I had this bad mammogram and that they're going to remove a little piece of me and it's going to be fine. And he went to school the next day and he was worrying about it. So he went to the school psychologist and he mixed up his terms, and he said something to the psychologist, and she dealt with him and she was fine and she got rid of him, and she called me and she was crying. And I said, what's going on? Why are you crying? And this is the school psychologist.
Yeah.
And she said, your son just came in here and told me you had a bad mastectomy.
What? Oh, God. Okay.
Where he got that word from, I don't know. But he mixed it up with mammograms. So that was, yeah.
Well, let's take a quick break. And we'll come back. I want to talk about your son. And I want to get to how you are the badass queen of patient safety.
Okay.
As I have just deemed you right here on the air right now.
Thank you. Where's my sword?
The epee, that we will be dueling later, is on the wall.
Fantastic.
All right, back in a sec, folks.
No matter how you travel, it's good to have a plan. Some people plan every minute. No sleep, bus, museum, another museum. While others only plan to take it day by day. When it comes to your finances, a plan is just as important. You can count on Credit Karma to give you the insights you need to understand your options so you can take charge of your financial path and find your way to money. Explore how you can make financial progress with confidence today. Intuit Credit Karma. Karma you can count on.
Craving your next action-packed adventure? Audible delivers thrills of every kind on your command, like Project Hail Mary by Andy Weir, where a lone astronaut must save humanity from extinction, narrated with stunning intensity by Ray Porter. From electrifying suspense and daring quest to spine-tingling horror and romance in far-off realms, unleash your adventurous side with gripping titles that'll keep you guessing. Discover exclusive Audible originals, hotly anticipated new releases, and must-listen bestsellers that hook you from the first minute. Because Audible knows there's no greater thrill than the one that speaks to you. Discover what lies beyond the edge of your seat. Start your free 30-day trial at audible.com/WonderyUS. That's audible.com/WonderyUS.
All right, we're back with Helene. And I mentioned, as I just have decreed you, the badass queen of patient safety. Yeah, that happens. And is it all human error? Who do we blame? Is it worth blaming? How do you square that circle? Because it's like a giant fissure in the earth that you're staring at lava.
Right. I just finished writing an article about the size of harm in the United States, the size of patient harm, medical harm. And it's massive. Whether you're looking at misdiagnosis, which is the number one cause of malpractice, if you're looking at medication error, which is also massive, and if you're just looking at patient safety issues, which includes misdiagnosis, but, is also like wrong surgery sites or wrong medication in the hospital, or they do a procedure without your permission that you was specifically chosen not to be done, or the handoffs. I mean, there's so much, and it impacts absolutely 100% of Americans. Every single American will either experience a diagnostic error or misdiagnosis in their own lifetime, because we know that 12 to 24 million Americans are misdiagnosed every year, and 1/3 of them are harmed by it, or they will have someone in their family. I've been misdiagnosed multiple times. My son was misdiagnosed.
Well, I want to hear your son's story, because that's really critical here. But I guess the intervening question is, what percentage is purely malevolent and what percentage is just being human?
There's an interesting statistic that 90 some odd percent of malpractice lawsuits are caused by 2% of doctors.
Wow.
So there are some doctors that are really responsible for the majority of the kind of harm, doctors that should have been out of practice a long time ago. And there's a lot of patients who will tell you that they complained about them to the state medical board, and the medical board took no action.
Mm-hmm.
But they start to get too expensive for a hospital. That's when they move. And that's a big problem for patients also, because they move from hospital to hospital. They change states. Mm-hmm. They get certified in another state that doesn't know about their lawsuit record, and they go somewhere else to do harm. So those guys are toxic.
So let's get to your son.
Yeah. So my son was misdiagnosed over 15 times in his first 15 years of life, and he nearly died from the last one. The first 3, I was able to resolve, took care of them very quickly.
What were symptoms?
So the first misdiagnosis he had was when he was an infant, and he had a food allergy. He was covered in hives. And the pediatrician's attitude was, well, we'll just slap on this, hydrocortisone. But my father, who was an eye doctor, said hydrocortisone is very dangerous with an infant, because he can rub it into his eye and he can go blind, mm-hmm. or he can swallow it and it can impact him in a great way. So we ended up covering him in oatmeal to reduce the itchiness. And
Aveeno? Not a sponsor, but Aveeno for the win.
But I'm just saying, I made oatmeal, nice scratchy oatmeal, and covered him in it. And of course that meant that oatmeal was everywhere. It was everywhere. It was in the diaper, it was in my hair, it was in my eyes, myself. So
that's quality parenting.
But the pediatrician never bothered to find out what was he allergic to. So this is pre-internet, and I got the list of, she put him, by the way, on a hypoallergenic formula, and he got worse. So I figured it out. It was simple. It was corn syrup. It's the number one ingredient, even in a hypoallergenic formula. And we had to keep him off. I mean, the poor kid didn't get any sweets because, corn syrup is ubiquitous.
Yeah.
So we kept him off it for at least...
You can't avoid that anymore.
Right. We kept him off it for a few years. And the idea was to prevent him having asthma and other more serious allergies. Mm-hmm. The second one was Giardia. He was learning to walk, and the nanny brought him to a pond, this is still in Connecticut, and everybody got sick with Giardia from this pond. And so I brought him to my doctor who was in Westport, Connecticut, and said, he's got Giardia. He's got all the symptoms of it. He was exposed to it. And she did a stool sample and called me up and said, no, he's fine. I'm saying, no, he's got every symptom of Giardia. And Giardia can kill you if you're an infant or if you're elderly. And I argued with her, and she says, well, come and do the stool sample again. So we brought another stool sample in, and she sent that off. And as I was walking out of the pediatrician's office, I saw the lab boxes, those white metal boxes where they put the samples in.
Right.
And they were out in the sun, and it was like 98 degrees outside. And I knew that any particular case of Giardia was going to be cooked in that box.
Right.
So I marched back in and had a talk with the nurse, and it was an argument, and I write about it in my book. And ultimately, I'm able to convince her that they need to bring them in. But that was also the last time I saw that doctor. And yes, he was diagnosed with Giardia because they brought the boxes in, the samples were treated properly, and she told me something I already knew. But he suffered terribly because of it.
Would you consider the fact that they didn't know not to put the samples outside malfeasance, or just the standard practice?
I think that they weren't thinking, and most of the samples were in preservative, and so were not cooked. But the sample I brought in did not have preservative, and they just threw it into a little tube without preservative and threw it out there. So that first one got cooked because it was a very hot summer. The second one did not, and he came back positive. And no apology. No, I'm so sorry that your son has suffered for 2 weeks with this infection that can kill him. The third one was more, I could have gotten litigious about. One night, just before his second birthday, my son had an asthma attack. And the only reason we knew it was an asthma attack because my father-in-law was there and he recognized it because all his kids had asthma. And so we raced him to the hospital, and it was really unusual in the emergency room. The hospital was filled with children on nebulizers. Every single bay was taken up with young people, like 13 and younger, on nebulizers. And we ended up going to an allergy group, and the allergy group said, oh, he's got really serious asthma, and you have to do this and you have to do that. And we were giving him, starting with 5 doses of medicine, up to 20 doses of medicine a day. And he wasn't getting any better. And finally, I pulled him from their care and brought him, this is like a year and a half of him getting medication. Got into a big fight. The doctor, the allergy doctor, threatened to call Child Protective Services on me.
Oh, God.
Because I was pulling my son from their care. But I went to Yale Children's Hospital, and they figured out that he never had asthma. What he had was a sinus infection that had never been properly treated. It had only every time he got an ear infection, it was actually a sinus infection. Every one of his sinuses were solid material.
Oh, my God.
So they put him on 35 days of antibiotics. I mean, there's a good reason to control antibiotics, but not to the harm of a patient who's not getting any better. And sure, he was a snuffly kid. You know, he had some allergies, but he didn't have life-threatening asthma. Right. And because of that life-threatening asthma, I had closed my consultancy to focus on saving my kid's life. So we got
full-time mom cop.
Full-time mom cop. So we had all of these 3 solved, and mom solved them basically within his first 4 years of life.
Wait, so how much faith should people practically have in primary care at this point now? Or ER doctors?
I think you have to use your common sense.
Or is it the 2% is 90% of the problem thing?
In this particular case, each one of the doctors who made these mistakes were good doctors, but they were hyper-focused on their little area. They really didn't look.
They couldn't think globally.
They couldn't look holistically at the patient. They couldn't look at the patient as a whole body. They only looked at the part that they knew. What's interesting, though, is in pediatric cancer, it's really hard to misdiagnose pediatric cancer because it goes from 0 to 100, in a flash.
And it's been 80 years of research. If you misdiagnose that, you're a really bad doctor.
Right. And they can be missed. I mean, but generally a parent knows, a mom, I think,
Well,
to be,
instincts.
yeah. They know when something is significantly wrong with a kid and they'll push. And you have to, as a parent, you have to be willing to fight the person in the white coat if you feel that you're not being heard.
So I want to turn
But
our time.
that wasn't his big misdiagnosis. The last one was an 8+ year crazy sequence of symptoms that just kept getting worse and worse and
Over
worse.
8 years.
Over an 8+ year period, from the time he was 7 to the time he was 15. And he nearly died at 15 because for a lot of reasons, but because the specialists, and we saw 5 neurologists and 2 pediatricians and saw psychologists because they thought it was in his head. But when he nearly died at that last point, and I mean, he had you can't imagine bizarre behavior. And they kept thinking it was psychiatric or it was neurological. And towards the end, before he was saved, he had lost his memory entirely. He had body aches and pains, which they had called growing pains. He would have mysterious rashes and fevers that would come and go. He had Tourette's. He had OCD. They had just diagnosed him with narcolepsy. And when the last neurologist told me that I should also expect that my kid who had ADHD, OCD, Pandis, which was a very rare neurological disease, which is what we thought was the correct disease. When he said that my son was also going to have catatonia, I lost my, I can't do the curse word here, but I lost it.
What?
I lost my shit. And I stood toe to toe with him and told him to fuck off and that he was fired. And I went and I found a whole new team of doctors who were willing to stick with me until we found the answer.
And the answer was?
I can't tell you. It's my book. My book is
Oh, the teaser, really?
Yeah, it's a medical mystery.
When
kind
does
of
your book come out?
I don't know yet.
Okay, so this is a dum 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 moment.
Yeah, dum. But I can tell you that it took them only a month and a half because they were willing to find an answer and to stick with me to find the answer. And it took a month and a half to identify it. And it took a year and a half to get him to health.
I can guarantee you I know what he didn't have.
What did he not have?
Hysterical pregnancy.
That's true. He didn't have a wandering womb or hysterical, and he didn't have cancer.
Good.
He did not have cancer.
All right, that's the best spoiler alert we can say right now. So let's spend the rest of the show talking about the Patient No More initiative. And my first question to you is, and this is kind of a hot take for me.
Okay.
Everyone says the U.S. healthcare system is broken.
Yes.
I say it's working exactly as planned.
As designed.
Yes.
Yeah.
How do you feel about that?
I agree. I think it's working as well as it can given its design. Mm-hmm. And I think we have to go in and rip it out by the roots and completely redesign a new system.
What would it actually take? A new country?
I think it would take a moonshot. I think it would take a minimum of $100 million a year for a group of experts in what needs to happen to get together and battle it out and then try it in a hospital. I actually was invited to work on the moonshot to fix healthcare.
With the Biden moonshot?
No, but they couldn't get the money. And it really does need some of the people that I've been working with over these last few years. People who are really unique, and having you involved would be amazing, as would having, I could list, 20 people off the top of my head who could really dig in. And we need people who are representing the patients. We have to completely rethink, how does a doctor work with patients? They're talking about a lot of workarounds, but the workarounds are workarounds, meaning that they're not going to solve the problem. They're just going to avoid a couple of terms in the road.
Your area of the playground in terms of fixing healthcare is mostly patient safety.
It's diagnostic error
it's not
and
fucking
patient
with
safety.
health insurance douchebags that want you to die and won't give you the medicine you need.
Well, I think that they're the reason why it's designed so badly.
Okay.
I think the root cause of all of this is that insurance made it so difficult to work with doctors that doctors had to band together to create backroom offices that just dealt with insurance.
Yes, they spend 80% of their time doing billing.
Right. And they needed to get out of having to fight for every dollar. They hired accountants and they hired lawyers and they hired pencil pushers to deal with that. And what they never expected was that the pencil pushers would start to push them around and tell them what they can and can't do so that the corporation that they had created could make more money. So it is the corporatization of healthcare, which was started by the insurance companies, that I think is the number one problem. And I'd have to do a little time travel to try and fix that now.
Do you have a hot take on AI being a blessing or a curse in the future?
I think it's both. I think that we don't have the willpower where it needs to be to make certain it's not a curse. I think that it's going to go leaps and bounds and get better. I think that patients are using it. If I had AI, I mean, I did this. I actually put my son's symptoms in order into the old Chat GPT. And they said, well, we're not allowed to diagnose. I said, I understand, but I worked it around. I said, but what specialist do you think we should go to? Mm-hmm. And I got it to say, well, you could be, neurology. It could be infectious disease. It could be this. It could be that. And then I said, okay. And then, what do you think that these specialists are going to find? And it gave me a diagnostic differential, a list of possible diagnoses. And it was dead on.
Wow. So this is not the James Cameron version of AI that my mind always goes to when I think about it.
Her? Did he do Her?
Well, there's Her with Joaquin Phoenix, which is like, if Scarlett Johansson was my AI, fine.
Okay.
I will die happy. But if, the Terminator and Skynet are my AI.
Sorry, yes.
I would probably be a little more miserable.
Well, the problem
or HAL
right now,
2000 not letting me out of the pod.
Well, the problem right now is it's hallucinating. It's coming up with stuff. I gave it some comp books, and I said, "Can you name 10 books that were bestsellers that would be comparable to my book?" Which is part of the process of getting your book published. And it made up 3 titles.
It made them up?
Yeah, made them up. They didn't exist as books. We know of healthcare researchers who were on deadline, and they asked it for 10 citations, and it made up 2 of those.
That's bad.
Yeah, it's really bad. So it is fantastic if I want to know which of these 2 restaurants is better for me.
So in a nutshell, Patient No More is your pending book. It's your column. Help me understand this.
Yeah. So Patient No More is my Substack.
Okay. Your Substack.
And it's available for free to everyone. My prior version of this was a column for a medical advocacy group called SITM, the Society to Improve Diagnosis in Medicine. That one was called DXIQ, and that was extraordinarily popular.
Acronym alert.
Yeah. So DX is diagnosis,
Yes.
like RX is for prescription, and like TX is a treatment.
Ah.
So DX is what the shorthand for diagnosis.
Right.
And so DXIQ. And it was supposedly written for patients, but my number 1 readers were doctors.
Okay.
And when that charity, that nonprofit, went bankrupt last year, I started Patient No More.
So I see you're slowly, we're recording this in early February. This will air probably in March or April. But hopefully by then you'll have peeled the onion layers back a little more, but people can discover the things you're teasing on there on your Substack, right?
Well, the Substack right now is I'm doing a high wire act. I'm creating a book called A Guide to Surviving American Healthcare, and I am dropping 2 chapters every month for free. So I'm writing it and publishing them. And I promised my readers they won't be more than 1,500 words per chapter.
You know what? I read the first one, and yeah, you're. What are the speak truth to power? No, you're doing a good job. I really like your attitude. It's really well done. You're towing a good line.
Well, I want to educate patients and empower them to push back when they need to push back, and when they should be not complacent, when they should be compliant. That's the word.
Right.
When they should be compliant and actually follow what they're being told.
All right. Now it's time for my favorite part of my show.
Okay.
I asked AI a series of questions about you.
Uh-oh.
And you can either pretend to guess or don't guess. But I asked them if you were any one of the lead female influencers of the 21st century. who would you be? And it gave me 3 names.
Wow. Okay.
It said you were a combination of Erin Brockovich,
Nice.
Lisbeth Salander, girl with the dragon tattoo,
Right.
and Dorothy Parker.
Oh, wow. I love Dorothy Parker.
It said Helene has the ultimate relentless drive of Erin Brockovich, the research chops of Lisbeth, and the snark of Dorothy Parker. She's who you want in your corner.
Oh, that's really nice. Thank you, AI.
Yes. And the second one was what Marvel hero or villain would you be?
Oh, I want to hear this one.
You are the superhero that the American healthcare system doesn't deserve, but desperately needs. A relentless, strategic, no BS fighter. So congratulations.
Thank you very
Jessica
much.
Jones, Dr. Strange.
I wouldn't mind those extra arms that he has. That would be great.
No, it's very impressive. Very impressive. All right. So Helene Epstein, I got all these credentials for you. Writer, author, advocate, speaker, badass, patient safety advocate, Queen Bey of Don't Fuck With Me, and Stop Telling Me the Wrong Diagnosis.com. That's not a website.
Wouldn't that be a good website, though?
I'm going to register that right now. Well, thank you for
Thank
coming on the
you.
show.
Loved it.
All right. All that stuff will be in the links in the description, guys. And we hope you enjoyed the show. See you next time. Bye.
Out of Patience with Matthew Zachary is a production of Matthew Zachary Worldwide. The executive producer is Matthew Zachary. It is mixed and edited by Kyle Moore. If you like the show, ratings and reviews are always welcome wherever you get your podcasts. If you have guest suggestions or would like to learn more about sponsorship opportunities, email podcast@matthewzachary.com. For more information about Matthew Zachary and Matthew Zachary Worldwide, visit matthewzachary.com.